Marvel puts out a great comic book. Could be a bad idea. So we have The Avengers, Loki Unleashed. Now, Marvel is starting to do some cool things with the branding, kicking it old school. And as a result of that, and this sort of stems from the whole 80 years of Marvel thing and theme, and they've reeled in some old school guys to do new books. And when I first heard that this was going to be a thing, I was like excited. But looking at this objectively, from a business standpoint, I don't think this is going to work in the way that they think that it's going to work. For starters, Avengers, Loki Unleashed. This is written by Roger Stern. He is an OG. He created Monica Rambeau, who you see me talk about a lot, and obviously, as you can see on the cover over there, if you can, I don't know if the light's reflecting off, but you can see that she's a part of this book. Artist also, though, is Ron Lim, and he was part of the Infinity Gauntlet arc. He did Infinity War, if I'm not mistaken. I can't remember if he also did some of the post Infinity Gauntlet arc stuff, which would have been like Adam Warlock's Infinity Watch. I can't remember if he did any of that stuff, but he was part of that whole thing, which I've covered here on this channel, going over my Who is Thanos series. So they get this powerhouse of a team to write something new and something fresh. So this is a new story. This isn't just a reprint. This is a newer story, and these events take place after Avengers 227, which I actually have right here, which has Monica Rambeau, and this is one of her first appearances. This is, I believe, her first Avengers appearance, if I'm not mistaken. But when I'm reading this, like soon as I open up, you can just, from the get-go, see the style difference when you compare and contrast it to, let's say, today's current, mainstream comic book. And it's just a complete difference. Not only do they obviously tell you, hey, these events take place here, but in the story, they're talking about these whole different events, and I took some notes here because there's some things that I don't want to miss. So I believe it was it Zemo that was a part of some things that were taking place with the Avengers, sending them on this goose chase. But it's small. It's a small thing, but it's a big thing in the same respects, because Iron Man wasn't a part of that whole deal, that goose chase that I'm referencing with the West Coast Avengers and such, because specifically of what he was dealing with in Iron Man 218. And they mentioned that, it's like, hey, this is what popped off then, right? So keep that in mind. This is why he doesn't appear in the Avengers book or West Coast Avengers book, because he's doing things that are happening within their own place. And that is something that I miss with, it doesn't happen all the time. It didn't even happen all the time there back in the day, but it just happened more often, where even if they had their own books going on at the same time of the Avengers, a lot of the events felt connected. So it didn't feel random, which is what you get a lot of often when you see even people that are popping up in the same book that have their own current runs right now, which a lot of them did. A lot of the OG Avengers did. They also mentioned some things that happened in Thor 361 as well as Avengers 264. So they're jotting this stuff down as the comic book is going along. It's just real small. It doesn't get in the way of the story. Just reminding the reader, hey, the events that they're talking about consists of things that happened before. Now that does happen. It just doesn't happen as often, and quite often it's not even the fault of the writer. Some of it is, but it's maybe more the editorial staff, because they're not connected purposely, because it takes a lot of work to sit here and try to think and be cohesive as a unit with this entire deal. You have to be on the same page saying, hey, your character appears in this story. So you got to keep that in mind in terms of writing. quite often nowadays it's just a big free for all where everybody just writing their own separate books. And yes, you get those crossover events, but quite often, that doesn't even happen. You don't even know what's taking place if these, events are taking place at the same time. Sometimes they do, but not often enough do they mention this took place before it, this took place after it. And so forth. And I just think it's because they're just handing everybody a book nowadays, and Marvel puts out a lot of books nowadays, and they're just not on the same page. It's hard to keep up with, and it is a job to keep up with it, and I don't know who over there is not doing the job. Also, they mentioned some things that popped off in Fantastic Four 280 when they mentioned that I believe they were getting some construction on their mansion or their headquarters, Fantastic Four, and they were actually kicking it with the Avengers in that process. So they talk about all of this like really early on, sort of in the book. Now, what I loved about this book is how they treated Captain Marvel. Now, I'm not saying she was the forefront, but she does some cool things throughout the book, sort of in reference to her powers that we don't get much of. She doesn't even appear that much, certainly currently, but she has obviously in the past decade. But, and everybody's in their OG suits, obviously, because this takes place after Avengers 227, which I talked about. And it just, even through Captain Marvel, for example, because remember, she's a new Avenger at this point, and she's talking like sort of funneled through her, which I thought was really cool. When she sees Janet, she sees, who else? Iron Man. Who else was it? I believe Thor was there as well as Captain America, and all of them are talking. And she's like, "Man, we have some of the OG Avengers having a conversation." She's like, I'm stamped right now because I'm part, and I'm kicking it with some of the OG Avengers, and specifically, obviously, Iron Man and Thor and Wasp. Those are the people that started essentially what as the Avengers. So I thought that was cool. But she does show her power as well as her intellect. It's a complete behavioral difference. If you read some of the more recent Monica Rambeau stuff, even like in Avengers No Road Home, and she doesn't act a lot like what she did in the past. And you can say that for a lot of different characters. And I'm not even saying this is like of the times. It's more so behavioral. They don't act the same. It's not to say they treated her like crap, but she, like the fact, I've done my research on this villain that we're about to now go through this here in a little bit. But there's a villain that we're going toe to toe with. I've done my research. He's tried to strike her and misses, obviously, with her, and she's kind of OP. If you know her power, she's kind of OP. It goes right through it, ends up hitting Loki at the end. But just something that's that small, it showcases really how smart she is. And I just love that about the whole deal. But I don't never know how to say his name. Is Seiss Neg, which is basically Genesis backwards. He was introduced in the 70s. And by the way, this story would have taken place, if it was written during the same time, it would have taken place in the early 80s, 83 if I'm not mistaken. And so Loki, and this is Loki Unleashed, that's the whole idea behind it. Loki is trying to drain this guy's powers, right? I'm not going to go into detail about who Seiss Neg is, but we even get a hint of who he actually is, because Doctor Strange is also part of this, and Living Tribunal, which I thought was cool to see Ron Lim be a part of, because he's drawn him before, and to see that depiction, Living Tribunal sort of step in and tell Doctor Strange and the others, like, you guys know him as this, but he's a lot more. He's really important, even though he's going against you guys right now. He's really important, even in terms of the creation of the universe. And they're like, wait a minute, he was part of the Big Bang and so forth. So you got that sort of bombshell getting dropped on you. And at the end of it, Living Tribunal judges all of them, and basically it's like, all right, you guys are just going to go back where I told you to, where you guys were at. And it's just a complete difference. And that's the thing that I was doing as I was reading. I was like, dude, so much took place. This is a one shot, right? And so much took place. So much important things were noted in this book in a one shot. And I'm thinking about all the books that I read that I got five issues in, and I'm like, okay, well, where is this going? This is not really going anywhere. But I think reading this, and you as a reader, if you do decide to pick this up, that's probably the first thing that you're going to notice is just the complete difference. Not even just with the artwork, but more so the storyline itself and where it goes. The difference between a comic book now by a lot of these newer guys as opposed to someone that was writing books back then. And Roger Stern did a phenomenal job on this, considering that he also created Monica Rambeau. He obviously knows how to use her and utilize her, and I think he pays a lot of respect to her. And I just love the book. I overall just love the book. But I think the main thing to take away from it is just the difference in writing style, from them letting you know, okay, this took place before, after these events. They're acknowledging these events that take place. These are things that got me into comic books. And you can't even say I'm just being some boomer old head. This book was written like 7, 8 years before I was even alive. You know what I mean? I just can acknowledge objectively acknowledge the content difference between what is being put out during in a mainstream comic for the most part now versus something like this or somebody that's been in the game doing a book. It's just a complete style difference. And for the better, when we talk about books like this, it's just a style difference. And the things that I care about, continuity, all of those things are being acknowledged in this one shot. And you just get that feel as a reader, like, look, the events that are happening in other books that are taking place right now, that are ongoing series right now, they matter. And quite often in a mainstream comic, I don't get that feel. For one, because the character is showing up in the same book, but it's like it doesn't even matter. They have their own like solo books, you know what I mean? And it gets confusing sometimes. And you don't know. You really don't know. Like, all right, well, Spider-Man shows up here, and there. Like, does this take place before, after Amazing Spider-Man with his friendly neighborhood Spider-Man? I'm just using that as an example. And it gets confusing when you see these characters pop up, and certainly when they have an event going on and like the character doesn't even acknowledge the event. I talked about this with Daredevil, for example, and the War of the Realms, and how his book had nothing to do with the War of the Realms, even though he played a pretty prominent role in the War of the Realms and basically replacing Heimdall. And it's a big content different. And this is why I say it may have been a mistake, because now people get to see and compare and contrast, even pulling an OG and having them do this. You get to see. You get to see it, man. It's not like I'm just making it up. You for sure get to see it, man. You get to see and compare and contrast. So when I compare this to a lot of the lousy crap that gets dropped in today's day and age by more so newer writers, it's a night and day difference. These are the good books. This type of material is the books that I wish Marvel put out a lot more. Not to say that they just have to get old school writers. That's not even what I'm saying. I'm saying take what this book does good, acknowledging continuity being probably the most prominent things, and just make sure that's a part. And this is maybe more so is less on the writers and more so on the editorial staff. And the editor-in-chief, I don't know what they do over there, but it's more so on them to keep the cohesiveness and tell you as a writer, if you're going to write this book, you got to keep this in mind. You got to keep these events in mind. We're not doing this whole thing where some of these books that we're putting out don't even matter. It's just random. So I do encourage you guys to pick this book up. It was great.